Hey there, Shadows of Brimstone fans. Aaron Lovejoy here from Miniature Monthly. Today we're going to be assembling the small enemy sprue from the Shadows of Brimstone City of Ancients remastered core set. That's a lot. That's a lot of words, and I said them. All right, so the first part of the video is for those of you who just want to get your models off the sprues and onto a base and play in the game. If you watch the second half of the video, I'll show you how to fill gaps, get those mold lines off, and get your models looking spick and span to put a nice fancy paint job on them. Alright, so today we'll be working on none other than Shadows of Brimstone, City of Ancients, smaller enemy pack. So we have got the Night Terror right here. We've got the new Stranglers. I'll flip this around. The new Stranglers, new Tentacles, and new Spiders. And so we're going to be putting these together. I'm going to show you how to get them all together and ready for your games. So first off, we need to look at our tools. I've got these God Hand clippers. You can use any old sprue cutters, works fine. The God Hands are just really, really sharp and really good. You just got to be careful because they break. Mine's broken right there. Anyways, those work awesome. I've got super glue and some Instaset to make it dry really, really quick. I've got a file that is rounded on one side, flat on the other. And I've got several different kinds of knives. So these are used mostly for mold line removal. I've got a regular X-Acto knife, a rounded one, and then a rounded scalpel. And these rounded areas help me get into small spots where the straight edge won't get into. So that's very good. I've also got my reading glasses so I can see what I'm doing and see all the little mold lines and stuff. Now, if you're just putting these together for a game and you don't care about the mold lines, then you do not need to take the mold lines off. But basically, you're going to want to come in and clip all the models out, being careful not to clip away stuff that you don't want clipped. Everything else is pretty much straightforward, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Everything except for the Night Terror is a single piece, which is really nice. These new Stranglers are just awesome looking. The detail is really, really crisp. Just super, super insane. Let's just take a quick look at that. Very, very cool. This is going to be super fun to paint. Even if you're just putting a quick base coat on and dry brushing, I mean, it's gonna pick out all that detail. Now, the only model that is multiple parts is the Night Terror. He's got his head here. The body and two arms, so not too crazy. And yeah, so basically just clip all this stuff off and you're good to go. Be careful, these pieces right here are both attached to the pins that come out, so you don't want to clip that part away. You want to clip the part next to it. Otherwise, you have nothing to attach the leg to. I mean, it will still attach, but it won't be as strong of a bond. All right, once everything's removed, take a quick look at the sprue. Make sure there's no extra little parts. All right, that sprue looks clean. Put this to the side. Once you get that done, we're going to take off these little nubs. So I always just sort of, a lot of times with the nub, just kind of pulling along it and running your knife like this, it will give more of a sawing action. It cuts those nubs off real cleanly and without a lot of pressure, so you don't end up cutting yourself. In areas like these fingers, you want to just be real careful that you don't cut away detail that you don't want to be gone. Make sure to get these foot nubs off. You'll be like, hey, you don't even see it, but when it's standing there, you don't want that lifting your model up off the base. Clip these ones real good. Again, this is going to be inside the model, but you want to clip this good, otherwise it won't fit very well. And I clip the top off these little nubs, off these keys. Make it a little bit shorter so that I know for sure it will fit well inside the model. Now, if you're just going for speed, and you're just going to be putting these together to do some gaming, once you got that clipped, that's all you need to do. That will be going right there. Do a quick test fit here. It's got a little bit more stuff right here on the hand. Let's do a test fit of this. And where did his head go? His head's way over here. Got it. Look at that face. Super good. The detail in these new models is just insanely good. I believe the original one, the plastic sprue, it had it cut in a bunch of different pieces, making for a little bit more clunkier build, especially if you weren't filling gaps and stuff like that. Just didn't look as nice. So these ones a little bit easier to put together. They fit really nicely. Look at that. Perfect. If you remember the originals, they were a multi-part kit too. They didn't always fit together all that well. So these are nice because they're single piece. And it's really cool looking sculpt. Sometimes if you got bigger nubs, you can just clip them off with your sprue cutter. So this takes a little bit of time. Obviously you could skip this part too, but then you'd have all these little nubs all over the place, and I don't know. Quite honestly, that's a bit bush league, if you ask me. You need to at least get the nubs off. If you're not going to get the mold lines off, get the nubs off. Make it look halfway decent. So I never try to cut through all the way, just in one cut. I'll do a bunch of tiny cuts, unless it's a tiny piece already, because I don't want the knife to cut a part that I don't want cut, and I also don't want it to cut me. So if you've been in this hobby for any length of time, or you plan on being in it for any length of time, you're gonna cut yourself. It just happens. But mitigating how bad that cut is probably a good idea. Then we got our new tentacles, and the tentacles are really cool in this. They remastered all of them. I think the detail is much better, and you'll notice that this set has two different shaped tentacles, but then in the City of Ancients, or not the City of Ancients, in the Swamps of Death set, they have two other tentacles. So if you mix and match your tentacles from the two sets, you'll have 4 different sculpts. I think in the original one there was just 3. So that is very cool. And these clean up really quick. Just a couple contact points. Again, make sure the base is done. And then you got the spiders. Spiders are always tough because they're so small and they've got these pokey little legs, and I get poked by them all the time. If you don't think you can't get stabbed with the plastic miniature, think again. I've drawn blood many times with small figures. So figure out a way to hold them that's best. and start cutting off all those nubs. I think that's it. So if you're worried that you're going to miss a nub, because that can happen, grab all of the spiders at once and do the same nub on each one. So this is the back nub. I just do it on each spider. And that's the only one. One, it will remind you to do that nub on each spider, but also you'll start figuring out the best way to cut it off. Do the second nub is on this leg right here. When I'm doing commission work and building armies and stuff, it can get kind of daunting because there's a lot of models to be done. And so doing this like this, one part on each model and just working my way through, it really helps to keeping my speed up. So we'll do that nub. Because what happens is if you hold the model for too long and you clean every single nub off each model, you just start naturally slowing down, and it's a bit mind-numbing. It's a lot of work, and so you don't want to slow down at all. I can keep up my pace for hours like this. Just cut these. So once I've got everything cut off and got the nubs off, I can put a couple little beads of glue on the foot and put him centered on the base. Maybe a little bit back from center because he's got all these tentacles and stuff, so he takes up a little bit more room. I'm going to go ahead and zip kick this. Or accelerator. Zip kick is a brand name, and so it's just accelerator. Basically, it makes the super glue glue instantly. Now you could use plastic glue on these. I prefer super glue because it's much quicker for me, and plastic glue is also a permanent solution. So plastic glue will melt both sides of the plastic and kind of mesh them together. Whereas the super glue, if I need to, I can break him back off the base. Like if I'm going to put him on special third-party aftermarket bases or whatever, I can do that. All right, the next step, we want to assemble our model. I'm just using super glue here. Make sure it gets down in the little key area. He has a little tab here that goes into that hole. Oops. Stick super glue all over myself. Squeeze those parts together. If super glue ends up coming out, I always take a little paper towel, roll it up, and you can kind of wick away any excess super glue. Always do a final test fit. So I want to make good and sure that this goes on. So this is a little bit loose, so you can have it up or down a little bit more. I think the original was down a little bit more, so that's how we're going to do it. Glue this bottom part. Now the really cool thing is they sculpted some of the fur going up over. It overlaps the join there. And that gives it a little bit better look. This guy goes on a larger base. Obviously, he's huge. Grab some Instaset. And just hold him on there for a second. right, perfect. All right, that's it. If your goal was to get the models off of the sprue with the minimal amount of work, you are done. The models are off the sprue, the tabs are cleaned up, and they are glued to the base. Now you're ready to paint these, or even if you don't want to paint them, you're ready to play the game. But if you're looking at doing a little bit more, watch the rest of this video. Now, if you want to do something a little bit better, I suggest cleaning off these mold lines. Now every model has, the molds are two-part molds, and where they come together, sometimes plastic comes out between there, and that's called a mold line. So you can actually see the mold line here on this model. It goes all the way down, and basically it'll go all the way around the model. So you got to find all those lines, and I use my X-Acto knife, the side of it, and I just scrape away at those lines. Now the key here is not to create a flat area on all this detail. I kind of work my way around each muscle and make sure that it curves, that I've still got that curve going. And I'm basically going to do this to every single model. All right, the last step is an optional one. With multi-part models, you have little bitty gaps right here. And if you so choose, if you want to be a baller, you can fill those gaps with putty. I use Abe's Epoxy Sculpt. It's a two-part putty. It's an epoxy putty that I like using because it thins with water. So we're going to need a sculpting tool. I use this sculpting tool with a knife on one end and a spatula on the other, and I also use an old brush, kind of stiff bristles, and I'll use my wet palette that's a little bit wet with water, and that will allow me to, this is Epoxy Sculpt thins with water, so it will thin out and I can smooth out my gap filling. So make two little balls roughly the same size. They don't have to be exactly the same size. Abe's Epoxy Sculpt is nice because it is one of the cheaper putties on the market, especially if you buy more of it. I buy it in four pound lots of it, and it's not too bad. But the other nice property about it is you can sculpt a little bit with it. And it also thins with water, so it's great for gap filling. It can also be sanded afterwards. It can be filed. It dries very, very hard. So unlike green stuff, which you can't really sand or file. So now I'm just going to take my little spatula tool and I'm going to shove that putty up into the crack. If you notice, I'm not being super careful. It's pretty clunky, I guess is the word for it. But that's okay, because we're going to come back later with our paintbrush and we're going to actually thin it out with some water and it'll look fine. But this way I found works the best. You kind of got to go back and forth. Sometimes you got to coax that putty into those cracks. It's not always easy to get inside the gaps. But if you work at it a little bit, I think you got it. Now, don't forget, models like this one have the gaps on the arms. And this, again, you kind of got to get around that fur texture, get the putty in there. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be in the crack. Don't forget the leg. So we got the arm, the leg. This is kind of a pain in the butt because the fur really does kind of get in the way. But if you're just patient and persistent, coax that putty in there, get it in all the cracks, and you should be good to go. Now, I'm going to take my paintbrush, and I'm using a sort of a stiffer bristled brush for this, just a regular hobby brush. And I'm using water, and I'm just thinning out all the way around, just sort of brushing it on. I'm kind of brushing hard, not too hard though, because you don't want to actually take the putty will actually come out of the gaps if you push too hard. But I just kind of smooth it out with my paintbrush. It's really, really quick. It's the easiest way to do this. And yeah, there you have it. I've got those gaps filled and it looks great. All right, one more thing on the tentacles. I want to put a little sand around the outside edge of the base, and instead of putting gravel, which would kind of look out of scale, I'm going to sculpt the sand. So I'm just taking some of my Abe's epoxy sculpt. It's 2-part epoxy putty, and mix it up 50-50, and just start adding it to this base. Squeezing it around these rocks, and then trying to make it really thin around the outside edge so that it just kind of fades into the base. Just work my way all the way around. I'm also leaving it a little bit rough, the texture of it, because I want, once we start stamping the sand texture in, I want it to be a little bit rough and look a little bit more natural. So we won't sit here and smooth it all out. Can lick my finger, kind of go around the outside edge of the base just to make sure that I didn't get any outside the lines. Then we take a piece of blister pack foam, any old foam will do, and stamp it, pushing relatively hard down onto that sand. And you can come back and do it multiple times so that the texture is very, very random. But otherwise, that looks pretty darn good. Perfect. Now I got sand around my rocks. The rocks look like they're in the sand instead of on the sand. And we are perfect. All right, that's it. Your City of Ancients enemy sprue is assembled and ready to venture into the mines of Brimstone. Or actually, maybe they're venturing out of the mines of Brimstone to wreak havoc on the lands around. If you're looking at instruction on miniature painting, some tutorials, we've got lots of tutorials over at Miniature Monthly. www.patreon.com/Miniature Monthly. We've also got online courses at miniaturemonthly.com. We've got you covered on your miniature painting learning, so join us today.